I used to be the optimistic one. Now it's changed all that.
I killed your optimism.
Yeah.
I killed the dream you dreamed.
Yeah, you always have to be optimistic in the new year, right?
Exactly. It's a new year.
Absolutely.
There's new opportunities.
You flip the page. Last year's gone. New year.
The meaningless
Positive outlook.
drivel. No, I'm just kidding.
It's like every day you wake up. You gotta think positive,
Exactly.
right?
Well, what you and Keith said it one day on when we were on Keith Smith's show.
Real talk?
That I remember that you're not 6 feet under, so it's a good day. So you're alive.
I don't remember that, but I agree with it 100%.
That is true. I do remember that. Yeah.
So it's always good. It's a good day. It's a good day at Charlottesville.
Well, it's like that Milton Berle old joke where he said, I like to read the obituaries to find out I'm not in them.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, those old comics were the best.
So we got. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Today y Mañana. Happy New Year. I'm Alex. This is Xavier. We're really excited to have you joining us this morning. I think Nick will be, if he's not already on screen. Our guest today is Nick Erpy.
Nick Erpy.
He's going to be joining us.
The
He's
guest
the CMO
today.
of Emergent Financial Services. Among his many other roles, our financial planner, our budget guru.
Budget guru. When did that happen?
This year. I guess
This year.
Like,
we just
when
decided
did I
that.
get a promotion?
I
Not
had to give you
budget
some
guru.
I did some new names. We help a lot of our people with. You see a lot of budgets.
I can see I put that on my resume after
Budget
if
guru.
emergent something was emergent. I'm going. Hey, I'm a budget guru.
Among many other things, he has many talents. So we're glad to have him joining us this morning. It's a chilly morning.
Oh, it's a perfect day for.
It's a perfect day for a café con leche.
There you are.
Get a nice warm one. You know, get nice and cozy. Soon, if not this week, maybe next week, you can go to the new Guajiros location.
I was thinking about that, right? Is that next
on
week?
10th Street.
I think
The
everyone's been
former-
thinking about that.
Yeah, so you can go there and get a nice warm café con leche. If you really need a little pick me
Do they
up,
still
you can
have
get
the
Danilo
pastelitos?
special. I'm sure there's the pastelitos.
The
I think
guayaba?
not.
We'll see. They might even redo. I think there was a hint that they might add to the menu or change it up a
some-
little bit or something like that.
Anytime
So I
what
don't
they
know.
have
Yeah,
for,
we'll see what they have.
Absolutely. So it's a
The
good
pastries.
day to get nice and cozy, get into your warm place, and watch some Today y Mañana and learn some things. Every time I'm on with Xavier,
I learn all
Nick,
the time.
I feel like I learn some things. So it's a perfect day for that. Of course, thanks to Emergent Financial Services for always presenting the show, and thanks to our fantastic partners, Credit Serious Insurance, Castle Hill Cider, Matias Young Realty, and all the great partners that we have on the show. So we really appreciate everything that they do. So,
And so we don't forget, we have to say Feliz Año Nuevo.
Feliz
right?
Año Nuevo.
That's the
Feliz
mañana
Año
part.
Nuevo. You know, absolutely.
Today, mañana,
Feliz
mañana.
Año Nuevo. You can still say Feliz Navidad. I am a true
That is
believer
true.
Yeah.
in the 12 days of Christmas
Absolutely.
and the season of Christmas. If you ask me, we should go back to medieval times where it was 8 weeks long. I think that would be the
Starting December
8 weeks.
25th.
Starting
though.
December 25th. So
Yeah.
from December 25th, it was 8 weeks of Christmas season.
Well, because I will mention that Alex is very upset because the other day I asked him, "Do you want me to pick up you anything at the store?"
And he
he
said,
said, "A bottle of eggnog," you know,
What
because
else
it's
is
still
new?
Christmas, you know. I could not find a bottle of eggnog
It was
anywhere.
January 2nd.
It was January,
If you
it was
ask
2
me,
days
it's
ago.
a disgrace. That I felt like doing a diatribe, a rant on air about the Charlottesville food,
Lack of
like
Christmas
grocery
spirit.
stores, lack of Christmas spirit. That on January
January 2nd,
2nd,
no
there
more
was no
eggnog.
eggnog.
During the
to be
Christmas
found.
season, you cannot get eggnog.
should be eggnog,
but
at
during
least.
Advent, you could have as much as you want.
Yeah, at least you gotta give me to like halfway through January. You gotta
Yeah.
have some eggnog on the shelf. You know what I mean? I don't expect everyone to go till February 2nd, but you gotta give at least till January 6th, Three Kings Day.
Three Kings Day, exactly.
I mean, Three Kings Day, you gotta have some. The 12 days of Christmas, if you count it out,
December 25th.
December
to January
25th to
6th.
January 6th. So but what do we
You were
do?
looking, ladies and
So-
gentlemen, an eggnogless man.
I really felt like bringing my Santa hat to the set today in protest. Like I am going
That's
to
his-
counteract.
that's a protest.
Well, I'm going to counteract the Grinchiness with like
with
complete,
extra Christmas
yeah,
spirit.
absurd Christmas spirit on January 4th.
Still Christmas spirit is not absurd or
Yeah,
should
you
be.
can. You can practice the Christmas spirit.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean everybody else has to.
exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. A couple
Start
shout
a new
outs.
trend.
Exactly. That's what I think we should do. We got Elizabeth Erpy, Dr. Elizabeth Erpy, watching the show this morning. Thanks for watching. My favorite. Elizabeth
favorite.
Erpy,
Your
no
favorite-
offense. to
and
the
your
other
favorite
one.
doctor.
And my favorite doctor. So it's perfect. It's a double right there. So yeah. So but still, Merry Christmas. I hope everyone still had a wonderful time and is still enjoying time with family and friends as we start the new year.
Yeah. Although we were actually, Michael and I were talking. I think it was Tuesday, right? When we went to work. And it's like there was nobody on the road. I mean, and today we couldn't even get out of our spot. It's like cars everywhere. It's like you could just tell people still coming back from wherever they went to, the second and the third, and boom.
That's kinda
It
nice.
just feels like they're back now.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, what I was doing food shopping on the 22nd, and nobody was on the road. It was funny. It was like crazy,
I guess
especially in the morning. I drove my wife to the hospital where she works, and like normally it's like traffic
Right,
at that
right.
time. Nothing. We got all the way there without a single, like having to miss a single light.
Wow.
And I was like, wow.
That's
Everybody
amazing.
started taking off, but now it's back to normal. You
Back to
can kinda-
normal.
kind of feel it. But it's a new year, which, as G.K. Chesterton used to write, that a new year is good not because we need a new year, but because we need a new you. A new soul,
you-
I think.
a new
is what-
soul.
A new soul.
Okay.
So it's an opportunity.
Well, that's like I said. It's a new chapter,
Yeah.
right? You just flip. It's a new chapter. Yeah.
down there to have a new chapter of your life. So
Good to remember the past, but you can't live in it.
exactly. You know,
As
and
the Great
speaking-
Gatsby once said, "Of course you can."
What? What did the great?
The Gatsby from the Great
Gatsby.
Gatsby said, "Of course you can," because that ended well for him.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, do not try to start a new.
That's why I
past.
don't practice that.
Yeah, you don't want to end up.
You
like
could
the Great
always
Gatsby.
make a random. It's like the quote from Shakespeare, like some have greatness thrust upon them. And stuff. Like I hate it when people use that quote to be inspiring, because in terms of the actual play, it's like a joke. It's like a diversion to get like the foolish character to do what they want. He ends up going on some sort of like wild goose chase. It ends up like being like totally like distraught and everything, and loses everything. And I'm like, why would you quote that? Like it leads him
Because
to
the people- the
disaster.
people
What
that
if
quote-
you haven't actually?
I was
read the
going to
whole
say,
Yeah,
the people
you-
that quote that never read the play.
Yeah, but it's like it leads you to disaster. I'm like, I wouldn't want that.
Exactly. So you always got to be careful with Shakespeare.
You got to be careful with any quote you use that it's not taken like out of context,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second,
I think I just turned
that didn't
myself.
end well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of new beginnings, we like to sometimes do this show at the beginning of the year where we kind of talk about a little bit what happened last year, a little bit what we're seeing for next year, because I think, this is the time of year where everyone, we've probably already fielded a couple questions like, so what do you think's going to happen to the markets in 2024? It's like, okay, we're like 4 days in. All right, I haven't gotten that part of my magic crystal ball. I haven't yet trained my prophetic powers to see this coming year, but I know Xavier has some charts he brought with him. You should see. It's a shame sometimes they can't see like in front of Xavier. He looks like so.
Yeah, I mean, I really
Intelligent
usually
and
don't do this, but I
well-versed.
realize I just can't. I don't memorize things as I used to anymore. So it's like
I still
before I
don't.
start saying something that's untruth, I might as well back it up with information that I know is here.
What I love too is
But,
that
you know,
I always share
the-
my chart
the-
with you, but then you never share any of your charts with us.
Well, somebody's got to know something. I mean, I got to be special somehow.
You got to hold the ace.
But the funny thing is, I always say to myself, we measure the markets from January to December, right? And in reality, we shouldn't do that, right? Because that's not really, the key isn't, okay, at December 31st, market's over, what do we do now?
Yeah.
The fact is, the markets change on a daily basis, right? And on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis. There are times that there are things to do because events have occurred during the year that make it important for you to revisit where you are and are there any changes, whether it be structural, tactical, or whatever you want to call them, right? However, it's the era we live in where we do kind of review what happened in 2023 and what do we think is going to go on in 2024 and how does that impact what we do and what we view as opportunities both in the marketplace and in other other situations. So it's nice to and everybody writes about it, so it's nice truly to review what happened and I just found 2023 to be an interesting year because I don't think, and I remember coming into 2023, I think there was a lot of negative aura around what was going to happen in 2023, right? One, the Fed had just raised rates dramatically. They were still raising rates, right?
Absolutely.
And, how are those rates going to impact both consumers, companies, corporations, et cetera, right? And I think the feeling was that if the Treasury was still going to, create some, the debt was so high and they were still going to fund it by borrowing, how was that going to also impact the marketplace, right? And I think all these questions were there at the beginning of 2023, and the expectation, if you look back historically, is that, all that, to a certain respect, is negative, and therefore we're going to
It
have...
usually adds up to recession.
Exactly, recession, or, we're going to have a slower economy, or we're going to have the situation where some markets are going to be in distress, right? But none of that happened, right? And so you sit back and you go, well, why didn't it happen? And the beauty of what we do, that's why I say, you learn every day. And it's always good to know history, but history doesn't always repeat itself. And two, sometimes it repeats itself, but not in the same fashion, right?
Exactly.
So we can't always say, it's like, everybody says, I think we're going to have another 2008. Well, we're not. We're never going to have another 2008 the same way we had 2008. It's just not going to happen.
It might resemble 2008 in some ways. It might
there may be another black swan, but it'll be a different, it won't be the same black swan.
Exactly.
Right? And so that's what you're always kind of preparing for, saying, how do I make sure that if something truly, something you can't predict happens, we protect it, right? But just to go back to 2023, right? So I think there was three things that all of us, and especially most economists, didn't figure out. One was the strength of the consumer. I mean, it was just unbelievable. The economy basically stayed strong because of the consumer.
Well, just remember, what is it, 70% of GDP is consumer spending.
Exactly.
So basically, you could make the argument that as consumer spending goes, barring a complete collapse because it's consumer spending, government spending, business investment, and basically exports minus imports, basically.
Right.
In other words, are we selling more to the world than we're buying from the world, right? Barring a complete collapse in the other three, so government spending ain't collapsing anytime soon, right?
That's right.
Barring a complete collapse in business investment or a complete collapse in exports, right? As the consumer goes, so goes the
Sure.
So
and
goes the economy.
if the consumer goes, and exports, imports probably do very well, right? So it's it's one of those things where it's, if the consumer does well, the economy does well in general, because companies have to sell things to the consumer, so they're doing well, right?
Exactly.
But the one thing that was highlighted in one of the articles I read was that back in, I think it was August of 2021, the consumer had an excess cash of $2.1 trillion, right? Oh. So this came out of COVID. Remember, we just came out of COVID. Obviously, a lot of people got, the economy was shut down. Many people, right, still had jobs. So they were getting still money from the government. A lot of companies were getting the PPP. Companies were getting other, I guess, funds of, cash from the government, to a point where the consumer had saved so much money, there was $2.1 trillion, right? So I think that, in essence, has been the fuel to what has happened, both a little bit in 2022, but really it just came to fruition in 2023, in particular with the travel industry. I think the travel industry did very, very well. So I think they say about, and this is from the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, has these numbers. $1.7 trillion has been kind of used from that 2.1 trillion. So there's about 400 billion left. But they're saying if we continue on the same path, that 400 billion will have been used by the end of the first half of this year, right? And then, what is the consumer going to get? There is no more excess, savings that they have, right? Now, we've talked about this a lot over the last few weeks, and even before that. The other area that's exploded is credit card debt. I mean, we've surpassed the 1 trillion mark. And the growth in that sector, credit card, non-mortgage credit debt, has grown by about 10%, right? And if it continues that trend, that's an enormous amount of debt that's being created by the consumer, right? And the difference is the government can create debt, but they're paying a lot lower interest rate than the consumer is, right? The consumer's paying, credit card of 20+%, personal loans of 10 to 15%. The only thing that was low back in 2022 was mortgage rates, right?
And that certainly wasn't the case in 2023.
And that's no longer the case. The only thing is those people basically that refinanced, took out loans, are sitting pretty on the mortgage side. However, everything else, they're still spending.
Yeah, it's not like you can take out a mortgage for your personal expenses. You can't be, hey, can I get a mortgage for my gas bill? It doesn't work that way.
That's right.
You can only do it once for the house you purchase.
That's correct. Yeah. And who knows how many, listen, when you refinance, right, you can take out, let's say that you already have equity in the house. Let's say the house is a $300,000 home, right? And you had a mortgage, you had a balance of $200,000. You could have easily taken $250,000, right? Because saying, hey, I was paying 7-8% interest. At 3% interest, I can borrow $250,000, right? And my payments more or less the same, or still lower.
And I have $50,000.
And I got $50,000, and what do? You spend it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So all that was happening. So I think from the perspective of the economy, I think the consumer was a surprise to many people as to how well they did.
So do you think economists and investors underestimated just how much the consumer actually had saved leading into 2022, 2023? Because obviously the theory was, all right, we're seeing inflation at levels that we have not seen in ages. Right? I mean, by the mid 2023, a dollar was worth 24% less than it was in 2019. So I mean, your purchasing power had dropped dramatically. So the expectation was, well, okay, if your real wages have declined, you can't buy as much stuff. So the issue was that there was an underestimation of just how much money the consumer was sitting on coming out of the pandemic when they weren't able to spend it and when they were getting a lot of stimulus and unemployment checks?
And I think so. And I think, 2022 was kind of one of those years where it just, rates were going up. I think people didn't feel good, right? And I think in 2023, you almost had a reversal of that. It's like, I'm done with not feeling good. We went through COVID, we went through the year after COVID, and then 2022 was a terrible year. The Fed, everybody's talking about raising rates.
Bonds were down, stocks were down.
Yeah, everything. So it's like, I'm done with this. I'm just going out and I'm spending my money. I'm having a good time. And like I said, the travel industry, the numbers did very, very well, right? So I think that's what happened. I think the consumer was just like, I want to enjoy life again, and that's what they did. They spent, and they went on a binge of purchasing or traveling or whatever they did, right? So I think that's what happened, and I don't think anybody can predict that, right? I know it's not something that one can predict, but I think that's what happened. The other thing that I thought was interesting was with regard to interest rates, right? So interest rates typically have a negative impact on corporate earnings, right? And because companies typically borrow from the marketplace. As interests go up, that means their interest payments increase, right? What I thought was really, really kind of a highlight was they did an analysis on the S&P 500, and as you know, those are the top 500 companies in the U.S., right? So we're talking about really good companies. But the 50% smallest companies, right, are paying interest rates of about 6%. The next 40% of the S&P 500, right, kind of the middle, are paying about 4.5%. The other 10%, the best companies, are paying interest about 3%. So what happened was that during 2022, there was an enormous amount of refinancing done by corporations, and they extended their bonds way out there to about 30 years. But these were done by companies that can come to the market anytime they want, and people are just dying to own their bonds, right? The Costco's of the world, the J&J of the world. I mean, all the great companies, right? So their interest rates are, 3.5%. They've locked in those rates for a 30-year period. They're doing extremely well because, as we know, with inflation, they're able to charge more money, right? They charge for their products. So now they're making more money, but their interest payments haven't gone up, right? Almost like the mortgage, right? If you got a 300% mortgage, that's locked in. If it's a fixed rate, it's locked in for 30 years. You don't have to worry about it. No matter what happens, you're locked into 3.5%. In the case of a corporation that can actually grow their business, they've done very well. It's the little companies that are being challenged, right? That struggle. And if you look at the marketplace and you look at what did well, right? It's the big companies that had a great return last year, and the little companies are the ones that suffer. Now, granted, big companies, large companies, growth companies, they had a 40% return last year. Small caps had about a 20% or less.
So it's not like they declined.
Yeah, so not like they declined, but that's a huge differential.
big gap.
That's 100% difference between 20% and 40%, right? So there's a big difference there. And so what I think we're seeing is that going forward, the interest rates are remaining high, right? They're still high for the refinancings for these companies, because a lot of these companies, their debt is due in 2024 and 2025, right? A lot of small companies also do floating rates because of the fact that that was a lot cheaper back then when they needed to borrow.
And floating rate just means that when the interest rates go up, their interest rate goes up. It's almost like if you had a mortgage where every time some people do. Some people have adjustable rate mortgages. It's a floating rate thing. Every time as interest rates go up, your interest rate goes up. So a lot of companies do the same thing with their debts.
That's right. And they had done that because at one point rates were going down. So that looked great for them, right? But then on the reverse now, they're paying a lot more. So I think all that will begin to, once again, show up in 2024. To what magnitude, it's hard to say. But I think we will. And like I said, and I think I mentioned this in the show in December, I took a deep dive into a number of mutual funds that own different types of corporate debt. Mm-hmm. And if you take a deep dive, there were already a number of companies that were not paying off their debt anymore, right? So they were in default, mm-hmm. right? Granted, a mutual fund, when you got a $2 billion mutual fund, and you got 3 or 4 companies, and it's 3 or 4 million, it doesn't impact the mutual fund very much, but it's there, right? So it's coming. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if this year that trend continues a little bit more, right? So again, higher interest rates were a good and bad thing. And good for large companies, not good for small companies. And the third thing that I wanted to mention was that obviously, our federal deficit continues to grow by leaps and bounds. So one of the fears coming into 2023 was, is the federal government going to crowd out, right? Private investors.
Yeah, in other words, if there's a certain amount of, because there is, granted, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the country can create more money, right? But they don't necessarily want to just print money out of thin air all the time, right? So there is a certain amount of investment that you can do, and even in other countries that print money, like China and other sorts, we've seen where if the government begins to invest too heavily or its deficit grows too large, it does begin to crowd out money that would be used for productive investment, instead just flows to things that the government has its hand in.
Exactly.
And we've seen this even in places where you could say, well, it's not a limited pie, the government can just print more money. Even so, it's not... Even in countries where the government can print more money, you do see that crowding out effect. And it's historically happened in the United States as well. It happened in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, where you had that kind of crowd. The government had gotten so large post-World War II that it crowded out a lot of private investment. And what happened? You had the malaise of the 70s. So it's entirely possible for that to happen, even if you could print more money.
Exactly. And The good news was that because there was so much issuance in 2022 by corporations, right, they didn't issue that much in 2023, so that wasn't, that didn't impact the market as much. But on the other hand, the biggest thing that happened was that the Treasury decided to fund the deficit using Treasury bills, the majority of Treasury bills, especially long bonds, right? Mm-hmm. And that was very helpful because then the Fed was able to use their reverse repo facility to basically buy that debt, right? Which they created that in order to ease when we had all the, back in 2008, and obviously during the COVID situation. But that facility is running out. So, it was at about $2 trillion. We're down to like 600 million. So even that, sooner or later, one of two things is going to happen. The Fed's going to have to stop because they've reduced their balance sheet, right? Mm-hmm. But they're going to have to stop doing that if the Treasury continues to issue more and more bonds, and that's going to have an impact on everybody. So I think everything that was good in 2023 that really helped 2023 is coming in 2024, possibly to an end because it just can't last forever.
Yeah, in other words, do you view 2023 as not as a turnaround, but as sort of a prolonging of the situation until at some point you got to face the music.
That's right.
One way or the other.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, at some point, you can't keep having people's real wages decline and then expect them to keep spending indefinitely.
Right.
Yeah, and talk about real wages. So there was a chart here.
And we just give a couple shout outs. So we got some people
While you
watching the
look.
show this morning. Camille Ababudlu, sorry, mispronounced that, watching the show. Astrid Lazar, Harper Arias, Joshua Joseph, Aslam Nuri, thanks for watching the show this morning. Lucrecia Morales, muchísimas gracias. One of the great, fantastic owners of Sombreros right here on the downtown mall. So thanks for joining us this
speaking
morning.
of which, was our first Te Mañana guest.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah?
Somewhat
Bernardo y Lucrecia,
3
yeah.
years ago? Was
Yeah.
it 3 years ago now?
Yeah, I think so,
Next
yeah.
week, I believe, will be our
Third.
Will be the third anniversary.
Are you sure it won't be the week after?
Or the week after. One of those 2 weeks will be the third
One of the-
anniversary. We'll make sure to mention it when it actually comes up.
We'll have to look it up.
I just want to bring on the consumer side, on how people reacted. I want to bring in Nick here for a little bit because you have been talking to us a little bit about the fact that in the holiday season, given that credit card debt was already at $1 trillion, we were seeing people's behavior. There was some research done on that people's behavior was changing in terms of how they were buying holiday gifts and so forth. They were using
Are you referencing the chart or the other thing?
the buy now, pay later.
The buy now. Okay, so if Judah, at long last, we have the one chart I sent you. Do you have that available? It's on screen. Thank you, Judah. So if everyone can see, buy now, pay later. Actually, I didn't bring the chart. I'm gonna have to read it.
You'll just have to watch it on the screen.
There we go.
There we go.
There, Xavier had it because I gave it to him. And service use, it's at its highest in a long time.
Oh, it's been growing.
It's been growing, but it's one of those things that has been used, and just in a combination with everything else we've noticed is that a lot of consumers did not, because of inflation, they didn't diminish the amount that they were buying. They just paid the higher prices, and one of the things they turned to was buy now, pay later, which you've probably seen over like PayPal, Firm.
Probably there's a lot of
Klarna.
places where if you don't order something, it says you can pay in full or do the buy now, pay later option.
Which, yeah, and one of the things we were talking about before the show, we were having this whole conversation about buy now, pay later, was the fact that, of course, they claim that, no interest payments as long as you pay, and it's a bi-weekly. But one of the things they don't mention, of course, is if you don't pay. So I noticed we did
There's
some
several
research.
things that happen. Like
So
if you don't pay,
there's one or two things. One is that for the PayPal, at least, if you do not pay, and if because they automatically make you put in your credit card. Excuse me. So they make you. I'm like Xavier. I'm always slapping the microphone. So you have to pay. They have to attach your credit card so that you actually do pay. Now, if your credit card payment does not go through on PayPal, you just are not allowed to use that function again. You are no longer allowed to buy now, pay later, effectively, like that. Or if you do it enough times, they stopped you from allowing you from doing it, which actually harkens back, because I was doing some research. This was something that everyone used in the 19th century. So in the 1800s, buy now, pay later was a thing. You used to pay in small. That you'd go to the grocery store, you'd buy a certain amount, and you'd pay in small amounts. And
It was store credit, like
right?
store
Credit. Because
accounts.
think about it, if you were a gardener and you needed a hoe and you couldn't afford it then, well, the guy selling you the hoe knew that you were never going to be able to buy it if he didn't have the hoe. So he'd lend you the hoe, and then you'd pay him what you had, and then little bits, and then et cetera, et cetera. Now that went out of favor in the 20th century and then the 21st century, because you started getting credit cards and banks and other things. Now we're going back to it because it's still an efficient, something people would prefer to pass on the payment later.
It's a little different though, right? I mean, and it's funny because I used to work at a little small grocery store in Queens,
a deli,
right?
of some sort,
A deli,
right?
yeah, a deli. Wonderful Italian person there. Love him to death. He gave me my first job as a delivery boy. But anyway, one thing I always remember, he had this book, and people would come buy things, and mostly it was like, senior citizens, and it's like, I'll pay you next week, and he'd write it down, right? Of course, the risk is that they may
don't
never
show
pay
up,
back,
yeah.
right? The difference here is that there is a credit card attached to this, right? So it's not the same because there's not that much risk to
There's an auto pay
company.
that's
It's an
set
auto
up.
There's
pay,
an auto
right?
pay that's set up.
But I thought first of all, what's interesting here is that it says here that 104 million people are using this, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, and there's 143 billion dollars of payment that of buy now, pay later that's being used. But what I and we discussed it, what I think is interesting here is that this doesn't change anything. Basically, this is saying I have an opportunity as opposed to pay everything. I buy $100 something or another. I don't have to pay it all today. I can pay it over the next, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I don't know exactly how these things work because I don't use it. But
most of them are they're either bi-weekly or the other one we were going to talk about was the monthly one, which does have an interest rate if you don't pay.
Okay.
That
So
would be
the issue is that eventually it hits your credit card. So no matter how you look at it, in a way, it's faking the consumer and saying, well, I don't want to use my credit card because it's full and I don't want to, right? And therefore, wow, this is great. I don't have to pay anything. But sooner or later, it hits his credit card, no matter what happens, right?
I think it's the prolonging of the situation. In other words, we've reached the point that with credit card debt at $1 trillion, you probably have a lot of people in this country that already are now carrying balances.
Large balances.
In other words, you no longer are paying off your credit card before the end of the month. You're now carrying a balance which is getting hit with interest rate, right? So the issue is there's the consumer sitting there saying, well, anything I can do to keep this off my credit card statement for another month or 2 or 3, right, I'm going to do. So in other words, if I can do this in 4 biweekly payments, that means the last 2 payments won't be on this month's credit card statement. They'll be on the next one. That means it won't hit my credit card till next month, in which case I'll then have another month to pay it off before that amount starts accruing interest. And if it's a monthly one, well, if it's 4 monthly installments, well, that's 4 months before the last amount hits my credit card, and then I have a month after that to pay it off. So I think what we're seeing is, all right, people had excess savings from the pandemic. They used them in 2020. They started using them 2022, 2023 as prices increased, right?
Right, in particular.
Then they ran out of excess savings. We saw a lot of people pulling from 401ks.
That's right.
Right? I mean, not personally, but like you could see in the national numbers, right? 401k balances declining even as the stock market went up, right? So people pulling money out of their 401ks. So they begin to tap their savings. At some point, you're like, I can't do that because I'm getting hit with a 10% penalty and a tax rate. So sometimes if you add those up and it's over 22%, you're worse off than if you use the credit card, right? You then see the credit card debt increasing. So now you're at the last leg where you're saying, I don't have the savings. I don't want to pull any more out of my 401k. My credit card now has a balance that is increasing every month. I'm going to do anything I can to still consume while pushing that payment out to the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing in the end. Like you said, the problem is that's a prolonging of the situation. That's not a reversal of fortune. That's not, okay, my real wages are now up again and I'm making more money than I'm spending so I can begin to pay down my debt. No, that's not what's happening. It's I'm still not making enough to feed my expenses. I'm just pushing this into the future. And that at some point, yes, things which cannot continue forever can still continue for a long time, but they cannot continue forever.
And so that brings me back. So I had this chart here, right? Because one of the things we have to remember is that, the inflation numbers that we had over the last 2 years, right, which averages about, for a 2-year period, about 13 to 15%, and depending on what we're looking at also, right? Those are huge numbers, right? So basically that means that in order to break even, your salary or your hourly wages have to go up by that much just to break even,
which
right?
They're not even close.
So the average hourly earnings growth in the U.S., right, is now at about 4%, right? And it's dropped from about 8%, and that 8% was about, the height was in the end of 2019, right? And it had gone up from 2016 to 28 to, because it really started to go up in around 2017 or so, and it went all the way up to 8%, right? And now it's been dropping down, and it's now 4%. So, hourly earnings are at 4%. They went up 4% per, on average, and inflation is 13%. So of course you are using more of your savings, you're using more credit card debt, you're pulling out your 401k, you're doing whatever you can in order to, consume and in some cases probably survive, right? Yeah. So those are the challenges.
That's like that chart that we used in our quarterly from Fred, which is the St. Louis,
Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve, but the listed as Fred, which we thought it was funny.
He's our secret source.
Yeah, he's our
Fred.
secret source. So Fred says that real median household income actually has been declining since basically the end of 2019. It's been going down and trending downwards, and that was reversed from so if you look at the charts, it started going up a little bit around like 2010 and so, but it really started taking off around 2015, 2016, and it's now trending downwards, which obviously is not what you want to see, because just as a quick aside for people to know, whenever you see the word real in front of something, what that means is that it's adjusted for inflation.
Right.
So what we're seeing is that the impact of inflation is making everyone's household income all these numbers have been going up and up.
What means the increase in your salary is not compensating for the increase in the prices
of goods.
Yeah, so your real wages have declined.
Yeah. The amount of money you're bringing to your home may have gone up in terms of numbers, but not in terms of the amount that you have to pay out for other things.
Yeah. And I think that, those are, so I think, those are obviously the challenges for 2024 is what's going to happen now. I mean, listen, I think inflation is not going to be at the 7-8% we've had before, right?
No.
I think that I think we all look at it and say that's just not. I don't really forecast. I can't forecast that, right? Can I forecast higher inflation that the Fed really wants, which is 2%? Absolutely. I don't think we're going below 2% inflation unless we have a recession and nobody's.
I mean, what were we last at? 3 point something?
Yeah,
3.8,
exactly.
3.9?
So I think we're going to be ranging about 3% for some time, right? And two, I guess it's a balance too. I think the consumer is going to get a little tired here, all right? So if the consumer gets a little tired and the economy begins to slow down, then of course inflation might come down a little bit because people stop buying and therefore prices begin to hopefully come down a little bit, right? So I think we're in an environment where I think inflation is going to be a little higher than it was in the past. The economy is going to slow down a little bit more, and we have to figure out, when is our government going to stop spending so much money, because it really cramps, it takes investments out of everybody else's pocket, right? And I think that's a challenge. So I think that's for 2024, those are the things that you have to kind of look at and say, how do I then position portfolios in order to make sure that, no matter what happens, we have a positive impact on people's earnings and lives.
But now the markets obviously are looking at that and being strangely, not strange, I mean, when you go deep into it, you should say strangely positive in the sense of, given everything we've just talked about, why were the markets responding so positively in December, right? Well, because they're looking at these same numbers and saying this equals rate cuts. Yeah. This equals lower interest rates. What are you kind of seeing there? Because I don't think we're quite as dramatic in how many rate cuts we think is going to happen as some of the markets.
So I would say, given what happened in December, I think most people at this point were expecting the Fed to cut the rates 6 to 7 times. And you read some articles, and that's what people are saying. I think the Fed's going to cut 6 to 7 times. Unless something dramatically happens in here, I don't think that's the case. And I think part of the markets haven't done so well between the middle of November to the end of December was this euphoria where, like you said, if the Fed cuts 6 or 7 times, we're dropping 1.5 to 2% in interest rates. I mean, that's a nice drop in interest rates, right? First of all, the long end of the market already gave us that. I mean, we went from a 5% 30-year to a 4% 30-year, basically, right? So we already had 100 basis points.
So all the Fed would be doing would be like, in other words, the yield curve is inverted. All they would be doing is flattening the
trying
yield
to flatten,
curve.
yeah, because the Fed's done nothing. I mean, short-term rates are still at 5 to 5.5%. The long rate came from 5 all the way down to 4. The 10 years below 4%. So of course, that has helped mortgage rates, right? But that doesn't help the banks at all. So I think the Fed's sitting there saying we have to do something for the banking industry. We can't have a negative yield, inverted yield curve forever.
Yeah.
So I
think what people don't realize is that when the bank borrows from the Federal Reserve, the bank is borrowing short, meaning the bank is borrowing at that 5.5% rate short term from the Federal Reserve. It doesn't, and then what the bank turns around, and the way the bank makes money is to lend long term. In other words, they just think about mortgages, right? A mortgage is a 30-year thing. So imagine the Federal Reserve, they made money because they borrow 6-month stuff, 3 months, 6 months, and then they lend 30-year. And normally what happens is your cost to borrow for 6 months is 2%, and what you make lending for 30 years is 6. Well, now it's reversed. You're borrowing at 5.5, and you're lending at 6, right? So you imagine like you're squeezed. You have almost no profit. And if you were to lend at less than 6, if you were to lend at 4, you're sitting there saying, oh, I'm losing money on every...
You wouldn't lend at 4, right? You wouldn't do it. But the bank has also expenses, so they have to pay. I mean, there's employees, et cetera. I mean, they just...
And if someone doesn't pay...
There has to be a gap there, because if there isn't, there's no bank.
There's no bank. So this is like, so anytime the yield curve is inverted, the banks struggle.
So I think the Federal Reserve sees that. So 4 rate cuts will get you back down to about 4%, right? So it has a flat curve, right? I don't know. My point is, and I think, listen, we already see the markets haven't looked good for the first 2 days. So I think the euphoria that we had at the end of November and December, I think is waning a little bit, in the sense that things are as good as they appeared to be back then. That was great news. It looked like, hey, the Fed's going to start lowering interest rates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be terrific, right? So I think the market's taking a step back here and saying, wait a minute, let's see what's going on. So, I think 4 rate cuts are definitely in the books, because I think for the banking industry that has to happen. I think they only cut more if things get really, really bad, But I think we would all agree that what the Fed didn't necessarily ease the inflation numbers, because I don't think inflation had anything to do with interest rates. So I think they're going to be sitting there saying, do we lower rates and then inflation picks up again, because we are now lowering so much that people say, oh, let's go ahead and stop borrowing again short and start spending, and boom, you get another inflationary cycle. I don't think they want that either. So they're in a tough position.
So do you see them postponing that decision? Like, if they're going to lower rates, not doing it immediately, waiting to do it?
No, I
as
think
long as possible, or do you think they're going to start doing
it?
When
would you foresee the earliest one happening?
I think the next one's coming soon. Yeah, I really do. Like I said, I just.
And then, but do you? Okay, so after that one, you see them having.
I think they're going to do. No, I think they're going to do a routine,
like 4 in a row,
quarter of points,
and then say we're going to pause.
Yeah, and then see what happens. Yeah,
and see what happens.
I think short-term rates being as high as they are is more damaging to too many people, to many companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly like you said. The challenge is the Fed is sitting there having raised rates. How many times they raised it? I mean, 8, 9 times. They raised it a huge number of times, right? And they're sitting there saying, and inflation not only is still at 3 point something, but the month to month in December's number, not December's, but it's like the one we got in December for November, was positive. In other words, it went up month to month.
Yes.
So they're sitting there saying the impact has not been as dramatic as they wanted. So the issue is, they're sitting there saying, well, what happens if we go the other direction? Does it have no impact again because it didn't have an impact the first time? Or do we now see inflation tick up again because the root cause, which is too much money chasing too few goods, has really not been dealt with? The too much money part on the fiscal side, in terms of government spending, hasn't changed one iota. It's still there. It's not like the government's spending less money, right? And the too few goods, it's not as though we've had this massive influx in production in this country. So the underlying cause has not changed. The Federal Reserve may have been able to put a lid on it by raising interest rates, but what happens if they get rid of the lid? Does it blow up again, or did the pot stop to simmer and so it's fine now?
Is that a question or is that a comment?
No, I didn't. It's a rhetorical.
I wasn't sure you.
I think it's the question.
I think it's the question that we don't know the answer to.
No, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
It's the question I think that the Fed is grappling with.
Without any doubt. Yeah. I mean, and this is what the markets are all about. I mean, decisions are being made by not just the Fed, but lots of people as to, like I said, last year the consumer, I think, was just nobody expected it, right? Yeah. So they came out of nowhere, they spent, and everybody was happy, right? I mean, everything looked good. The question is the consumer going to continue to borrow to spend, or are they going to get to a point where they say, I can no longer do that anymore. I've had my fun. I bought everything I want to do. I'm taking off this year.
Yeah.
So if that happens, then of course the economy is going to slow down. There's no doubt about it. You know?
Well, I don't know. To bring up another chart that I didn't send to Judah and that nobody else has.
Oh, a secret chart.
Well, it's in the update.
A secret chart.
You read it. It's in the. No, I don't have time to. It's in a Word document. So by the time I figure out that magic, but basically the thing is America's top New Year's resolution for 2024 is actually to save more money. 59%. It's the first time I've seen it over.
As opposed to losing weight.
Exercise and eat healthy are the next two.
Is exercise usually like number one?
I don't know
Usually,
because they've split
one
it up
of
to
them.
exercise more, eat healthy, then to spend time with family and friends, and then the next one after that is to lose weight. So I don't know why you'd eat healthy or exercise if not to lose weight. That doesn't seem.
Yeah, those
But
seem the same.
anyway,
yeah.
they all seem like the same thing. It could only be one, but the first one is to save more money, 59%, which is a good thing. However, on the flip side, only 9% of people follow through their New Year's resolutions through the end of the year, past the first month.
So let's save money the first month, and after
And
that,
then
it's
after
downhill from
that,
there.
So
stop.
January, we may see checking accounts go up. And
Well,
then
we're
after
already
that-
seeing. Remember, we already saw that. I think like 40% of people whose student loans resumed repayment in October were already delinquent. In other words, they already had failed to make the first two payments. This was in December, so there had only been two required payments. That had already failed to make the two payments. So you already got people who had another debt payment added to them say, I can't afford to. Either they said, I can't afford to make this payment, or they still think they're going to get bailed out of it. So that, well, I'm not going to pay because at some point I'll get bailed out. But one way or the other, they're not making those payments. So the question is that could be the precursor to saying, well, I can't make this payment, so I can't make this credit card payment either. And then you really start to...
One of the things we always talk about, too, when it merged was, so if you're not in that situation where you don't have a ton of debt and then you're not struggling to pay it off, but one of the things we always talk about is behavior as people is that if you have money, you will spend it. If it's in your checking account, you will use it because you see it as available. And so you don't realize how much you have extra that you could actually put away and find a way to do with less. So one of the things we always say is it's better to put the money into an account like a Roth or an IRA earlier and do it, or come
Roth.
up.
It works for the Roth.
It works for the
take
Roth.
it back out.
It works for the Roth, but you could also come up with a plan of, even if just like, hey, I'm going to start with $50 a month, and I'm gonna have it automatically, because one of the things with our clients is that they can just email Alex, I want this done routinely.
Yeah.
And
Have it go
will
to
be
a
done.
savings account, a brokerage, something.
Something like that, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna try to do with less, so that if I need more, I can you can easily tap into it, but to try to see if, like, part of what it is that to reduce the effect of your own behavior. Like, it's almost like having a new habit. You're changing your habits, where if you have just the $50 less per month, you will actually not need it, because you will find a way to do well with what you have. Because we've had cases where clients have not even, they were confused because they thought that the money had been pulled because it was so easy to do. And you don't realize that how powerful that is.
I think the key is, when you run a financial plan, right? You look at everybody's expenses, you look at, on their income, you look at their savings, and the goal is, okay, when can I retire? Can I retire at this particular age? Can I retire at 62? Can I retire at 65? Can I retire at 70? People have different desires, right? And if I do, will my money last till I'm in the 90s, right? That's one of the things that we always try to say is, like, it should last in today's world into the 90s. What happens often is that we run the numbers and it's like, yeah, this is great, right? What we have to highlight to everybody is that the numbers, your income is extremely good. Your expenses, you're telling me your expenses, everything, you can live within those expenses and you still enjoy life, right? The problem is that the residual, in other words, if your income is greater than your expenses and there's left over, the assumption is that goes into a bucket that grows. In other words, it goes into investments that grows, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the hardest part to get people to do, because it's like Nick says, sometimes like, oh, we got another $100 in our checking account, let's use it. Well, no, that $100 was supposed to go into savings, because that's your future savings.
Yes.
So otherwise, if you use it and you don't invest it,
it changes your
then
expense number.
Then all of a sudden, the next year, it's like we come, it's like, well, your numbers don't look as good as they did last year because you never put that money away, right? Mm-hmm. So we try very much to educate and say, you have to, if you follow the plan, you have to do the following, and you have to make sure you, whether you put it in a savings or you put it in an account that we can invest, whatever it is, you have to make sure you do that, because that's how it grows. And that's how you have to take a look at it and say, can I truly live with the expenses, or did I make a mistake in my expense column, right? And then we can rerun it. But that's important.
But one of the things I also like to illustrate that point further, so there's ways of running the plan where excess savings are saved, and excess money is saved, and some where they're all spent. The difference between them is routinely 20%. So that means that you are 20% more likely to achieve your financial goals, which means for most financial plans of being able for your finances to last you until the age of 90, if you save what the difference the excess between what your expenses are and what you make. If you don't, that you're 20% less likely to do that.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a huge. That's a huge. 20% is a lot for, because you're talking about a confidence rate of like just between 1 and 100%. That's how it works. That's the difference between like, hey, if you're in a good position, you're somewhere between 80 and 90% likely for it to happen. I mean, if I told you you had a 60% shot that you're not going to make, your finances aren't going to make it until you're 90 years old, you might worry a little.
Yeah,
that's not as good as, now if I told you 80%, you'd feel a lot better.
Yeah. It's education. I think and that's the beauty about running financial plans, is because it really helps educate people as to here's your behavior,
you
right?
Visualize
and your behavior is saying that you can do this and you can accomplish this. However, you have to remember that this is what you've told us, and the result is that you are now going to be able to save the following. So, it's the follow up and making sure that people do what they have to do, because it's important, because it's easy to say, well, it's with this $1,000 in my checking account. Yeah, let's go buy a new bicycle.
Yeah.
Are you calling out Keith Smith on the show?
No,
I'm just kidding.
Keith,
because he loves bicycles.
Okay, wine.
Wine. Well, that does.
Where's that 10 bottles of wine that I really always wanted, $100 each?
Well, that's what happens to you. Like, I got a little more of this. Maybe I'll buy a $20 wine. Well, because the other thing is that people's habits aren't changing. Normally, what we would see in the old days, of course, is with today's, and I find it interesting because I'm kind of curious about how lifestyles are affecting these numbers, because normally what would happen is when prices go up or things get bad, people start eating carbs because they're cheaper. So like people will buy bread more, they'll buy milk more.
I eat them because I like them. But.
Right, but the problem is with today's lifestyle stuff, with people trying to stay healthy, if you are because obviously people on a carb diet, it's not a big deal. But they also eat vegetables, which are more expensive regularly than meat and other stuff. But if meat is also going up, so like where does that happen? I mean, that's why if you look, the poor people's food was always starches. If you go to like Italy, the history of Italy is all about pastas, because pasta was cheap.
In a cash economy, there is no, in other words, in a cash economy, your lifestyle directly correlates to your income. In other words,
exactly.
If you make $100 less, or everything's $100 better, you have no choice but to buy $100 less worth of food. Right, you can't.
So you buy things.
There's no I'll just buy it, but put it on my credit card. In other words, you literally can't maintain the same level of consumption if your income goes down in a cash economy.
Exactly.
Once you have a credit card or buy now, pay later stuff, you can maintain the same level of consumption even if your income. In other words, it's theoretically possible to have expenses higher than income for a certain number of months in a credit card economy.
Yeah.
Right. In a cash economy, if you don't have any savings, it's literally impossible to have expenses higher than income. You have to change expenses because you run out of cash and you can't buy anything.
Yeah.
So it's just we live in a different world than that.
And just as another statistic that we had found, we were talking about before the show, because last time on our previous show we did business bankruptcies we covered, which was up huge. Consumer bankruptcies are 11%. We're up 11% last year. And expected to be larger according to the articles we were reading this year. So that's the point on the small companies. Right? Yeah.
It's the small companies that are really getting hurt here with interest rates having risen so quickly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some challenges.
Good news all around
ahead, but obviously, like you always said, there's always headwinds and tailwinds, right? The market is seeing the tailwind of Fed might decrease interest rates, but then is looking at the headwinds of there are definitely some.
Listen,
some
I mean,
limits on the horizon.
it's not that it's all negative. I mean, first of all, the markets do what they do, right? I mean, the economy could be lousy and the markets could be going up.
Exactly.
The good news, though, is that, let's be honest, I mean, fixed income rates are much higher than they've been in centuries. I mean, centuries in years. It feels like centuries. And so that's good, because from a cash flow perspective, and over the last, let's say, 8 years, right? If you were nervous about equities, right? And you say, I'm going to put that money into money market, and you're earning zero, that's a no-win solution, right? So it's like, it was very difficult. Now you can definitely say, I can put it into something that's going to earn 5 to 6% and be very safe, and wait for the opportunity.
It's basically the first time in the last decade that you can get 5 to 6% without going into stocks.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
So, I mean, so if you're unsure or you're nervous, you can park some money into something that is still earning you, 5 to 6%, and allow it to be there until the opportunity comes up and you say, wow, this sector's looking really good, and let's go ahead and invest in it, right? As opposed to when you're earning zero, it makes those decisions much more difficult. So
and that's part of the thing,
from a cash flow perspective, things are much better now than they were last year and the year before that.
Yeah. Well, the key is always the same thing. It's like Alex was talking about Mr. Potter, where he's not selling, he's buying. You always ask yourself it's not okay. Oh, things are bad. It's how do I make money from this? How do I do better given the situation? Because we're all dealt the same. It's all the hands are all there, the cards are all there. It's like the song "The Gambler." Every hand's a winning hand.
Yeah.
Every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser.
And every hand's a losing hand. It's not about the card. It's how you play it. It's the whole point is that things may be bad, but there are always opportunities. You just have to be, instead of being, oh man, things stink, time to put my head in the sand. Instead of doing the miser from the old biblical tale where you just bury the gold, you find a way to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. This has been a good conversation, guys.
It has,
Really appreciate it. This is why we love having Nick on.
Well, I was going to end with
some charts.
A quote came to my mind in the middle of the conversation, which I love, and so I thought I'd share it because I know I'm always that guy that shares quotes, and I know that a lot of wise people always said that, like, beware of the guy that always shares quotes because he doesn't know anything himself.
Well, we are wary.
But
we are wary of Nick. So
I'm like, which is true. I don't know anything, so I always quote famous people. But Soren Kierkegaard once said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards."
That is so true.
So it's like, okay, we can understand what happened before, but going
one of my favorite
forward.
philosophers.
Kierkegaard, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Very nice.
When I was growing up.
Explains a lot about you.
See, every once in a while, Nick just says something.
Other than that, it just
I know.
sounds funny when you say it.
Yeah, the rest I don't want to go into.
That explains a lot.
Every once in a while, something profound.
Well, it's because I love quotes, because I realize that other people are smarter.
But that's a good one, too. That is true. That's exactly
that's
exactly, in my opinion, how you should live life. Yeah.
Exactly. Rene Descartes once said that he loves reading people from the old days because it's like having a conversation with someone smarter than him. So, like, when you read Rene Descartes, it's like having a conversation with somebody that likes to have a conversation with somebody that was smarter than you.
I liked it. It's always good that we do a finance topic and the Mr. Potter quote gets brought up. I'm just glad it wasn't me. This way people don't
get tired of it.
Alex, he always brings up the Mr. Potter.
But the Mr. Potter, but the whole point is it's always applicable.
It's always applicable.
Yeah.
You can always find a way. There's always a way forward.
Exactly. A couple more shout outs. Just thanks people watching the show. Beth March, thanks for watching the show. Bonnie Heaney, thanks for watching the show. Elizabeth Irby, the other Elizabeth Irby, watching the show this morning. So we appreciate everyone who tunes in and joins us this morning. And next week, I think we got some great guests coming on. I think we got Miranda's, looks like, and Christina Ball from Speaking Language Center. So we got some good people joining us next week. We'll get right back into the swing of things. Into the guests.
Lighter topic.
Highlighting. Yeah. Well, just highlighting all the great stuff that continues to happen in Charlottesville.
If we find an interesting chart, there may be a chart. If there's no charts, you'll know.
Sounds
Judah
perfect.
will know first because he won't get a chart in the email, and then everyone else will know afterwards because no chart will pop up.
Exactly. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you guys for being on this morning. Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Xavier, as always. It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Emergent Financial Services, for presenting. Thanks to our great sponsors, Matias Sion Realty, Credit Serious Insurance, Tasso Hill Cider, Forward Adelante. Thank you all for watching us this morning. We look forward to seeing you all next week. But until that time, we wish you a Happy New Year, a continued Merry Christmas, and we say hasta mañana.